everyone, and welcome back to the Secret Sunday session. Today, I am joined by Daniel Principe. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm so excited to start this conversation with you in the space you're working in as a youth educator and advocate. In a world at the moment that is talking a lot about youth, talking a lot about discipline around youth and how we are educating them, how we are influencing them. So I feel like the conversation with yourself is very relevant to the times that we are in today. But firstly, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a delight.
Now, I know a little bit about yourself and your story, which has led you to where you are today. But for those people that are not aware of who you are, who is Daniel and what does he do with himself?
That's a good question. Continue to wrestle with that and how to articulate that best. I guess my title says I'm a youth advocate and educator, which doesn't tell you much. I guess I travel around Australia engaging young people and those that care for them to think about the messages that have shaped all of us, especially boys, about masculinity, relationships, sexuality, and to consider, are these healthy, constructive, helpful messages, or are they actually harmful? Are they hindering boys from being their best version of themselves, young men they can be proud of, connected to themselves, to their mates, to others, irrespective of their romantic interests, that we would have attitudes that would enable a sense of empathy and respect to, gird all of our relationships.
What incredible work that you're doing in this space. Why do it?
Yeah, it's a good question. Two sides of the same coin, really, is, my heart breaks for young boys who I think are quite lost and quite disenfranchised, and whether we think that's fair, reasonable, proportionate to their current lot in life. It is the case. And I worry about what happens to insecure boys who become men and the harms that they inflict on themselves and others. And so there's a sense of wanting to prevent those harms is a real driving force. And then there's obviously the positive vision, which is like, well, who could they be? Like, what are their untapped gifts, talents, abilities that we all should be giving expression to? And that's true for young women and all of us, old people or not, it's like, how much more of us could we be giving expression to? And I certainly don't have all the answers to that, but I definitely want to be part of having conversations where we can, I guess, get out of the shallows and hopefully get into the deep and talk a bit more about, what has shaped us? What do we hope for? What could that look like? I would say early on in this space, I was mainly motivated by the injustices that I saw and the fact that many people I loved, both men and women, had experienced sexual violence and wanting to do something about that. And realizing that unless we, help boys become healthy men, then we're not going to address that.
It's interesting because a lot of people that have personal experiences, say with someone that unfortunately has been sexually assaulted or abused or anything in that sort of aspect, will normally cause blame to governments and legislation and look at our court system and then fall short and say, well, we can't do anything. So we end up just complaining about it. But for you, it seems like you've gone straight to the root and straight to the groundwork and working with young boys. Why was that the case and what led you to work with young boys?
Yeah, I think for me, like most things that birthed out of our pains, our yearnings, our hopes. I was raised predominantly by a single mum who had to make out myself what is it to be a good man and didn't really have the best guidance along the journey. My mum did a terrific job and being a mum. And I had to find out the hard way, through the boys around me, that me being a soft, sensitive kid wasn't very welcomed in this world. And I'll spare us all the details. But yeah, it was pretty unfortunate. But I'm now grateful for all of that and how that's shaped me. And I guess I think to myself, how many boys, whether they think they're the tough guy, whether they're the sensitive guy, whoever they are actually struggling under these very rigid ideas of masculinity centered around power, dominance, control, and thinking, what else could it look like? So that's a big, driver for me. And I guess for me, knowing the statistics, and they're pretty frightening, that right now in Australia, adolescent boys 15 to 19 are the highest perpetrators of sex offences, and now the highest perpetrators of child sexual offences as well. And so that's pretty significant. Now, when people hear that, they may hear me and think that means I'm anti-boy or anti-male. And sometimes I get that pushback by stating those kinds of statistics or wanting to address these abhorrent realities. I actually do it for the opposite reason because I don't think that's who boys are. I don't think an adolescent boy is innately wired that way, that that's who he is, that that's his destiny and path in life. I think something tragically has gone wrong there, where that is an ABS stat that is now finally making it into public light. And I want to be a part of doing something about that. Again, there are so many different factors and drivers of violence, but certainly one of them is to do with entitlement. And another part of it is how do we help boys make sense of their pain, grief, loss, tragedy in life? Because no one's waving any magic wands to take any of that away from any of us. The sad thing is boys don't have enough healthy avenues and outlets. They don't have the same care, connection, and community available to them as women do, which is actually why women do better when dealing with a crisis and dealing with pain. And I've been reading about that recently in a book about boys and why they just don't do as well. And some of it is to do with, again, men's own creation of our social settings and scenarios where we don't support each other, which means that there is more harm inflicted on men and those around men. And
Mm,
so that's just a bit of a dissection as to why we need to obviously engage boys sooner. And I guess, yeah, part of that is also my own desire, wishing that I had access to something like this, and something that I hope I continue to improve on in terms of how it does engage boys to be their best selves. And so, yeah, that's something that I wrestle with all the time. Certainly don't have all the answers, and continuing to, yeah, think deeply about how we can engage boys in a way that is really constructive, strengths based, lots of empathy and care for themselves and for others.
mm. A lot of people would look at that and see the statistics and see the cases that come through and say, well, you don't need to care for them. Like if they're a perpetrator, they deserve to have consequences and they deserve to follow a system, um, and be held accountable for the actions that they're taking. But why do you think that it's more relevant for us to invest in the story and the person and actually helping them through, as you said, something that they're probably coping from? Why is it important to invest in that rather than to place blame?
Yeah, well, I'm all for accountability and justice. Yeah, I wouldn't be an advocate if I wasn't. I think I've had a pretty strong bent towards that. And believe me, a lot of my advocacy is about we actually need consequences, because I don't think justice is purely punitive. It's restorative, it's educative, and it also signals to both that person and the victim that we actually care for them. And so, yeah, I'm all for it. I just think that if we're actually going to bring about the transformation we need, we can't just be catching offenders once the law finally catches up with them. We need to find other ways to disturb this and to hopefully redirect in a healthier way. And so, yeah, I think given how little justice occurs through courts, we can't be waiting for that. And we have to equip others to be involved in this. And, that's where we hear talks about being upstanders and these sorts of things. But yeah, my whole thing is all of it's justice, from preventative all the way to punitive. It's just, yeah, how can we do it in a way that's going to minimize harm to self and harm to others, hopefully before it's catastrophic. And right now in Australia, it is catastrophic when we talk about men's violence towards women.
Why do we think it's catastrophic now? Do you think that there is an influence based on, media? We are more exposed to cases and statistics, having more resources, or is it that there is a shift in culture?
This is a good question. I mean, some of the stats say some things have improved, that there's less sexual harassment, but then sexual assault rates have never been higher. Then someone might push back and say, well, that's because it's reported more and there's more awareness. And so you go round and round in circles. For me, when I say it's catastrophic, because people want to split hairs on this, it's like here we are in 2024, and a man is killing a woman every few days in this country. And for me, that is just such a level of barbarism, and brutality that you just can't fathom it. And I just think it's just, yeah, it is something that should not exist in our society, given where we're at and the amount of supposed advancements we've made in other ways when it comes to legislation, policy, social mores around how we treat minorities, how we treat those weaker than us or perceived to be weaker than us. You'd hope that, yeah, this would be something that was just completely intolerable.
Mm. And based on I guess, what you're learning and the environment that you're in now, what do you think takes people to those extremes in order to sexually assault, sexually abuse someone, or cause harm in a certain way? Like, why are we seeing these as mechanisms for young boys, especially, or men, use in order to hurt other people?
Yeah, I think there's some sense that some of them maybe don't know. I think there's a huge part that all of it for me, and this is the lens that I look at my work through, is how have we come, whether willfully or unintentionally, to deny someone else's humanity, to see other people as less human than us. Therefore, we are indifferent to their suffering, to their pain, to their voice, to their preferences, to their desires. And that's what I'm concerned by, and how, especially within a heterosexual context of a lot of this, how that is reinforced in terms of male attitudes towards women, that women are less than, that they're less worthy of protection, safety, care, and other things that are owed to them by individuals and by our society. And so that's the part that I'm most interested in, and how we are socialized through the world around us to see that and to believe that subtly. And so that's some of the work that I actually do, or actually a significant part of it is looking at the messages that we receive and how it undermines our capacity to see and treat other people as equal to us.
Mm. It's quite interesting because, there's also been experiences where women can be the perpetrator. And do you think as well, I know you don't do a lot of work with women in this space, but do you think it comes from the same motives of then being with a partner or being with someone and feeling like then the male in the situation is less than the woman?
Oh, I think anyone can dehumanize another person for their sex, for their race, for their cultural background, economic status. So yeah, that's not exempt for any person to treat any other person in that way for whatever particular reason. I guess for me, I'm just looking at it through a more of a normative lens, and the more obvious cultural messages that we subtly get, that yeah, women are less human than men. And so yeah, it definitely can happen the other way, and not immune to that. And I think a big thing is being able to say we can care about all of it, whilst also recognizing that there's trends towards things being more common than other. And therefore, where should we focus most of our attention? Not all, but most of our attention.
Mm. And we spoke about or touched on masculinity. Do you think that in this this day and age in the world that we are today, that we are sending the wrong message in terms of what masculinity is?
Yeah, I think we've got mixed messages, or we don't even know what it is. And I think that's a big part of the problem. And yeah, I think at the end of the day, and I've wrestled with a couple of my mentors, one of whom is a professor in the US on this. And at the end of the day, we are always going to tell stories about what it is to be male. And that's where we get this notion of masculinity from. And I guess there's people who reject masculinity altogether, and the concepts of femininity, masculinity. And I respect those as academic arguments. For me, I still come back to the fact that as humans, irrespective of time, place, culture, we've always told these sorts of stories, whether directly or unconsciously. And I guess for me, I'm like, I guess how I see it, and maybe I'm wrong on this, and I'm happy to be wrong on it and learn otherwise. We're always going to say something about what it is to be a male in this world, and so we may as well try and say healthier things, good things, things that are going to be helpful. And again, that would be true of all good humans. But it's like, how does that particularly engage with those who are male, and what stories are we telling about them? And so, yeah, I think for me, there's this idea of kind of the dominant, controlling, abusive kind of vision of masculine, this kind of pseudo tough guy that's got to put others in their place. And I think that has kind of risen even more in response to people's feeling of the emasculation of males, and that men are passive, or it's the time of of women. And so there's kind of like, I feel like there's been this counter rising to kind of combat that, and it's come from a really unhealthy, insecure place. For me, when I think about this, I'm like, well, we don't have to be part of emasculating men, and we certainly don't have to be part of a dominant culture of men that wants to put women and minorities in their place. I'm like, surely we can just be part of championing healthy men with things that I think are always in vogue. And that's part of my work with boys, is looking at, well, what are the healthy things that are attributed to any good human, but let's talk about any good male throughout human history, and how can we, I guess, assess ourselves, our vision, our purpose along those lines. And so that's where I come back to virtue. I think virtue has always been in vogue and always good. Like, it's always a good thing for men to be loving, to be courageous, to be wise, to be self-controlled, to be just, to have care, these sorts of things, to have fortitude. Like, these are just good things. I'm not saying that I embody them. I'm not saying I've arrived on them, but that is stuff that motivates me to think, is that what my life looks like? Is that what I'm becoming more like? And that should be true of any person. And I think we've really failed in that. I think I'm grateful that we have deconstructed some things from the past and asked some questions, but sometimes I think we throw away time-tested wisdom way too readily when it has provided an anchor point. And we kind of, I think for me, I see in part that for boys where they don't know what it looks like, and sadly either, check out or become toxic, for lack of a better word. And I think there's a really beautiful, healthy space in the middle where you can be grounded and you can care for others and care for yourself and have a backbone, but not use that to dominate and control others, but to be really secure in yourself.
It's really important, I feel, that that word that you mentioned, which is secure, because so often we don't feel secure, and that's why we act out or we choose different things in order to cope with, because we're trying to latch on and we're trying to identify ourselves in a world that, as you said, so confusing. There are so many different types of messages of who you should be, who you shouldn't be, where you should be heading, where you shouldn't be heading. And this overload of information on a young boy, I can only imagine the stress, as well as you said, there's almost that old conditioning as well that can come in, that you have to be a leader, you have to be dominant, you have to be the breadwinner. And that's being broken down, and that's shifting in the culture that we find ourselves in today. How does a young boy navigate his way through all this information and actually know what he truly wants?
Yeah, that is the biggest difficulty, isn't it? And that's true of all of us. How do any of us know what we truly
Mm,
want, what's truly good for us? And I think we're all on that journey. And that's very much the approach I have with boys. I don't get up there and talk to them as if I've arrived, I've worked this all out. I say, I'm a man growing up in a really pornified, sexualized world that has mixed messages about being a man. I didn't have healthy male role models, and I'm still working it out and trying to manage me well in a culture that I don't think sets me up, let alone you boys in a younger generation, to be your best self. And so we might have to do a bit of critical thinking and reimagine what this could look like for us to be good young men. But again, not every young person gets those opportunities or those conversations and has those role models around them. Everybody kind of talks about that as a crisis, and it is true. Like, there isn't enough positive male role models. And I'll be honest, that's one of the questions I ask boys every day is like, do you feel like you have enough positive, healthy male role models? And they say no. They feel like they don't see those stories told.
mm,
Uh, and that is something that I think we all have to kind of sit with. And maybe, you could argue, well, where are they looking? Because maybe if they're looking to TikTok or, wherever else, maybe, yeah, that could be why. Again, not saying that it's all bad on there, but, I think those stories are few and far between, and those characters that, yeah, are worth aspiring to are less so. That's definitely something that I think. And it's also hard to also endorse people in the public eye because we maybe don't know who they are. It's why I try to say, well, I think we need to notice and look for those virtuous traits in people in around us, our, older friends, our neighbors, our mums, our sisters, our uncles, like people who embody some really wonderful traits that we can notice and celebrate. It would be great to have good heroes and people that they can notice in the culture around them, but it's not always the case.
Do you think it's unrealistic to ask a young person to be accountable for themselves and the type of person they want to be in the story that they want to write in their life?
I think fully accountable, no way. I think partly, absolutely, yeah. And so I think when I look at some of what's going on and the harms that we're seeing to young people at the moment, I think a lot of it, like social media companies, the global porn industry, toxic influencers, and the people that profit from all of that should be far more accountable than the young person themselves whose frontal lobe isn't fully developed trying to make decisions. So, yeah, it's not to absolve them and say, no, not at all. But I think we have to look at that proportionately and say, well, hang on a minute here. How much is this a solo job for a 13, 14, 15 year old? It's not to say that the conversations aren't worthwhile, or the correction moments aren't worthwhile, but yeah, certainly where does the responsibility lie? And Professor Salter said that at the moment on a whole host of issues related to this, that we've put too much onus on young people having to be responsible for some of the ills happening in their generation, and not these billion and trillion dollar companies that profit from the dysfunction.
In your opinion, what do these billions and trillion dollar companies need to do?
I think there needs to be some serious regulation around what they can promote. I obviously think, yeah, social media, smartphones are pretty harmful to young people. It's a social experiment, and we're now seeing the consequences of that. I'm not formally, but I'm certainly a cheerleader for the idea of raising the age of being on social media and smartphones, just because of the impact that is happening. I mean, I feel like every other day another book or another publication comes out highlighting the harms of this on young people's well-being, mental health, body image, relationships, and then to the more extreme things to do with suicidal ideation, self-harm, and sexual violence, sexual assault. So yeah, I think there needs to be a bit of a reining in. I think we need to have a cultural shift on this. I think we've kind of handed young people devices, and that we've not really helped them and set them up to kind of succeed in that space. And I think a big part of that is by delaying it. And I don't mind being seen as being kind of outdated or whatever on that. I think just seeing the harms is pretty evident on that space. And yeah, I think more regulation around this, like there is so much harmful content that goes around on these massive platforms, from live streamed fight videos to self-harm to sexual, content, sexual assaults, that, yeah, I think big tech should play a huge role in this. Obviously, our government is now committed to a pilot for age verification on online pornography. It was also to include gambling and other things as well. That was the original recommendation. And yeah, all of this contribute to pretty unhealthy digital diet that is shaping the attitudes and behaviors of young people. And as you've highlighted, we have to help them. We've got to give them a bit of a cop out here in a good sense of it. Like, let's make it easier for them to be healthier, to choose good things for themselves.
Unfortunately, as much as we'd love tech companies to change and to pivot to support young people, sometimes as well, it does not happen. We hear these things circle around in the media and nothing does come of it. In terms of family dynamics and parents, I feel sometimes the conversation comes down to parents need to do more, grandparents need to do more, guardians need to do more. Do you think this is also something that we need to look at in terms of educating parents to be more aware and more disciplined in supporting their young person?
I think that plays a huge part. Like, I'm not here to tell parents, how to raise their kids. I'm not a parenting guru, but yeah, I mean, I think it's a pretty common trend to say that kids are running loops and rings around their parents when it comes to online, and there's just a chasm of information gap and experience gap on that. And I think, yeah, that parents need to kind of regain a sense of control, but engagement, and hopefully a sense of partnership with their young people on giving them these devices and how they help them through it all. Giving a 10-year-old and 11-year-old a smartphone, without any kind of rules or constraints around that is just a recipe for disaster. There are so many risk factors. And so, yeah, I think we need to help parents not feel alone, because a lot of the parents who are trying their utmost, they feel like they're pariahs. They feel like they're these stuck in the 1800s because, gosh, they delayed giving their kid a smartphone until they were 15, or didn't let them go on Instagram until they were 15, which is what all the gurus and experts say. and yet they're called kind of outdated or this or that, when all the research suggests that's actually going to be beneficial long term for your young person's well-being and mental health. So I think we got to find a way to make it easier for parents to get together, for them to talk about like what's working, what did you do, like how did you help your young people navigate privileges and responsibilities when it comes to all sorts of things as they're going through adolescence, but especially around this. And I think, yeah, as a society, I think we do need to be more intentional with how we raise young people. I think at the end of the day, everything is forming us, everything is shaping our beliefs and attitudes. Like education doesn't just happen at the front of a classroom. And so we have to be aware of like what's educating our young people. And, you know, in simple terms, are you happy for the internet to do that job? Or do you think, you know, parents and people who actually have kids' best interests at heart should have more of that role? Now, you can't stop it. They're going to be online. I love my phone and connected to the internet, but I thankfully have now finally got a fully developed frontal lobe and hopefully are making mostly good decisions online. And, you know, it's a very different proposition. And so, yeah, I think we all have to honestly ask ourselves that when, you know, especially when we find, you know, finally on the other side of it, but, you know, the Andrew Tate phenomenons and just other things. It's like, are these the kinds of people that you want raising a generation of young boys?
It's such a touchy and hard conversation to have when, as you said, devices are being introduced to kids as young as like three. You go out sometimes to a restaurant
Mm.
and you hear a kid crying and a parent just chuck them an iPad just so to shut them up. And that's where it starts. It starts this need and this relationship with technology and this must to have it and access to information on so many different levels that I remember like I didn't grow up with having access to all that information at that age. I even remember when I got social media when I was going to high school and the concept of it was so surprising and inspiring. And then all of a sudden it just drastically changed as you said, the experiment changed. But looking at language and the way that we stigmatize young people, I feel that sometimes the conversation goes a bit extreme and we do put a lot of blame onto them and we throw these statistics at them. I sometimes believe that no wonder kids act out in a certain way because they are molded to behave a certain way based on what society is perceiving them as. Do you think the way in the language the media is using, the way that we as, say, a little bit older people are using towards them is influencing how they behave as well?
Oh, absolutely. I say every day when I'm with boys, like I don't subscribe to the bigotry of low expectations. Like I'm not coming in here thinking that you guys are going to lack in insights and empathy and courage. And I don't bring that into your hearts and into this space. It's already here. It's our job to unearth that, to encourage that, to champion that. And so I think, yeah, we almost have kind of lowered our expectations of what young people can do. And, you know, that's when people will talk about helicopter parenting and all these sorts of things. And that's just one facet of that. But yeah, I think so. And I think, yeah, we hear a lot of stories and the worst of what's happening for young people and the harms of them growing up in this culture. And boys definitely tell me that, you know, they feel like they only hear negative news stories of teenage boys. They don't really hear too many positive stories of a young man's contribution in the world or to make his community or do something to make the world a better place. So I think that does play into our expectations and how we relate to them. And seeing them as like super fragile in ways that I think they've got so much more to offer. And yeah, I think that'll definitely, you know, plays a part in it. And for me, you know, this younger generation, I get to see it every day when I see their insights and I see their empathy and their capacity for reflection. I think for me, I'm like, yeah, that blows me away from about this younger generation. Is I'm like, you know, I'll have like a year 7 boy put his hand up and I'll ask a certain question about, you know, what does this all mean? And they'll say things like, sir, it's objectification. And I'm like, how do you even know what that word is? Like you're in year 7, you know? And so one of the most incredible things is like seeing insights like that. And I could give countless examples where young people have just demonstrated capacity that I certainly didn't have at that age, like at all. And so I actually think there is so much there to tap into to give them credit for and encourage. And so that's why for me, it's like champion young people, like champion boys is my tagline, and then challenge culture. So it's like, yeah, I want to highlight those stats. Not that I share them with young people, I share them with their parents and educators and those that care for them so that we can then respond in a way that actually helps them. Because, yeah, I think they do hear so much of the worst about them. But I think it's important that the adults in the room are aware so that we can do something about that and make it easier for them and for us to help raise them.
Mm. I'm interested to know, what do the adults think when they hear the statistics?
I think they're overwhelmed. A lot of them don't know some of the things that I mentioned earlier. So I spoke at a primary school in Sydney on Friday, and had some parents come up to me afterwards saying that they were in tears. And I don't go out of my way. My kind of promise is that I will address the elephants in the room very, very gently. I don't try to be provocative. I don't try to say things more extreme than they need to. I think reality speaks for itself. And sometimes parents feel they need to apologize. Like they'll get emotional afterwards. Some of them will tear up and they'll say, "I'm sorry." And I said, "No, no, no, no. Like your reaction is actually proportionate. It's just, it's reasonable. Like we as a society have inflicted huge harms to young people. More of us should actually be crying. Like more of us should be lamenting what has actually happened and how we've got to this point." And so, yeah, I actually think that is a fair response. I'm not trying to make people cry, but I cry a lot. This stuff breaks me from time to time because I think to myself, gosh, this is so unfair. Like you were 11, you were 12, you're 13, having to navigate things that you should not have to. And so I actually think one of the things that I say is like to the adults is it's like, it's great. I'm championing empathy and respect in young people, 100%, but we have to model it. Are we modeling that for them? Are we extending that for them?
I love that because it's so important, as we spoke about earlier, is having those role models. And a lot of the time, if it's not external, you look to your parents and you look to the people that brought you up in this world. And sometimes it's that checking point where you have to reflect on yourself, and am I modeling it? And am I being a good representation to my young person? Such an important conversation to have. Um, do you feel that, or do you ever fear that the conversations that you have in these workshops and in these programs and with young people and parents, that it's left at the door, that you have these amazing moments and you're able to connect so deeply with people, but then they walk out of the door and it all goes over their head, and knowing that you may not actually have been able to change anything?
Yeah. Oh, I think anyone who cares deeply about outcomes and lasting impact should allow that thought to haunt them, not to cripple them, but to at least grip them and ask that question, and to allow us to feel a bit powerless at times. Yeah, absolutely. I certainly don't walk out of a room being like, right, there's like 200 boys who are never going to have a tough day in their life. There you go, school. There you go, parents. I've
Winning.
sorted it all out. No way. I sit there thinking I can give them the best conversation in 90 minutes that I can humanly do. And they are going to go, and I say this, it's actually part of my closing remarks. It's like, guys, you're about to leave this auditorium, leave this hall, either head on a bus, head into the playground, log online, pick up your phone, and you're not going to be in the same space that we've created here to encourage the very best of you. And I know you've got the insights. I know you've got the empathy. It's really hard to now have the courage to live that out. And so I beg them, close to beg, and ask them, would you just make it easier for one another? Please, just make it a little bit easier for your mates or the new kid or the girls or whoever to just have a chance to get through some of these challenges. Like, would you just make it a little bit easier for them and for yourselves? And so I'm trying to appeal to their sense of solidarity, that they're all facing some challenges, that this isn't a boy v girl thing. This isn't an adults v young people, like we're all navigating this. And so would they try and do that? And of course, I sit there going, yeah, I wonder how long, some of these messages would stay there. And at the end of the day, you can only sow seeds and do what you want to do. And of course, like for me, best practice looks like a more full day program, and then engaging staff and engaging parents to keep the conversations going in a way that doesn't center on, me coming in and delivering talks and doing incursions. And so, yeah, there's better ways to achieve that. However, yeah, it's you can't feel like you're blowing into a hurricane sometimes.
Mm. It's like anything. I know in the work that we do, it's you can only hope just to plant the seed, and the rest is up to them. And you have to accept the fact that sometimes you're not going to be able to help and save everybody, and unfortunately, sometimes you're not going to be able to change the statistics, but you can just be able, as I said, to plant that seed and only hope that you have planted it enough for them to change a perspective. And even if it's in a moment, or then they come to a realization at another point or another experience, and just hope that your conversation has triggered them to change the way that they would act or react in a certain situation. And it's tough.
Mm.
It's really tough. But we all can only really just do our part.
That's right. That's exactly right. And I'm not over promising that. I always say that to any school or community or not for profit, like no one can promise you that, yeah, you'll get to the other side of this and it's just eradicated all the challenges. I think for me, I hope it causes the boys who are striving to be decent to be more resolute, to take heart that there's people for them, and that we see their attempts and endeavors, and we commend that. And hopefully for the mushy middle, it might just plant a seed of provocation and, yeah, something like that. And hopefully, for those who are the kind of real resistance, like, who knows?
Mm,
Who knows? I sometimes for those ones, I think, maybe it shows everybody else not what to be, because sometimes those types really out themselves, and it can look ugly. It's very rare that happens, but the people that really resist this, I think it outs it. And in some ways, if the only redeeming factor of that is the fact that it hopefully confirms to the others, like, we don't want to be that guy.
mm.
Well, we'll take that too.
Yeah, because I mean, it would take such courage as well for a young individual to step out of the norm, especially. I mean, we see videos all the time of people, whether it's being violent, being aggressive, and it's normally a community or a village of people that jump in, and you don't want to be that one person that steps out and says, stop. How do you even just plant that seed for someone to, be courageous and don't be like everyone else, don't fit in, don't follow the bullying, and don't contribute to this culture? Stand out in
Mm,
your own, to a young person where isolation, being alone, walking your own path is so daunting, because it means that you are going to be all by yourself. And we know in the world that has been here for ages, what stereotype that person gets if they're on their own and choosing to choose a different path.
yeah. Totally. That is so tough. I guess I've always been someone who, like, rebelled against the pack. Yeah. And at the same time was very passive. So I wish I'd spoken up and done more. I was happy to be different to others at times during high school. And so, yeah, I recognize that is the hardest part, because I was different, but I was certainly not an upstand. I was certainly not courageous. I was certainly not willing to do things that mattered and try and challenge harmful things and harmful cultural practices. And so, yeah, it is tough. It's been something that I think is an ongoing life lesson of trying to keep your integrity, stick true to your principles. And I think all we can do is hopefully drum up an appetite and a vision in boys, and some of them get it, of what it feels like to be the person you say you are, to live out your values in public, even when it costs you. And I say to them, like, I've failed on that front many, many times, but that when you finally do that and start to create a pattern of standing true to what you say you're about, that feeling is nearly unparalleled. And I
Mm,
say to them, if I could bottle any feeling, it would be the feeling of what it's like to stand true to your principles, even in the face of, yeah, resistance. and how that will feel for you later that night and the next day, and the sense of groundedness, self-confidence, self-respect that cultivates. Like, oh, I wish I could bottle that and serve that to every person. And the reality is each of us will have those moments in life. And even if we don't rise to it the first time, they'll continue to present themselves. And I just tell them that I hope, that the sooner they're ready, it's okay if they're not, but the sooner they are, like that is an incredible feeling and something that will change them forever in a really, really positive direction.
I think, yeah, upsetting the norm and really honoring yourself is a great feeling for anyone once they decide to really to look at what it is that they want for their life and how they can even contribute to others' lives. It's, as you said, you can't take away that feeling. This has been an amazing conversation, and I'm so grateful for your time and sharing all the work that you are doing in this space, which is so, so needed. I do want to end on a couple of quick questions,
Go for it.
just to add to the conversation, because of course we need more information, we need to add more. But in the work that you are currently doing now, you have worked with so many young boys, but what do you truly think it is that they specifically need in order to feel heard, in order to feel safe, in order to create this space where they feel like that they can be their true selves?
Yeah, I think men that model it and invite them into that initiated community of healthy men, of men aspiring to be their best selves. Like
Mm,
they need that more than anything, because who you want approval from speaks volumes, because you will then play that out in your life. And so, yeah, I think they need to see it and see it modeled by men.
incredible. Now, to a young person that is currently, yeah, or a young male that is currently living in this culture and with the stigmatized language that we are currently seeing today, that is losing a bit of his identity, doesn't know where he fits, doesn't know what he wants, and could potentially be on a path where he may not honor himself and go down into poor behaviors in the future. What message would you give to him?
But I'm really sorry for whatever has happened to him, where he would see himself in that light, where he would think that that's all he was good for, all he was capable of. And I'm sorry for whatever, whoever, however that message has disrupted who he could have been up until now, and the people that have no doubt probably harmed him or neglected to love, care, nurture him in a way that he should have been. And I'm really sorry for that. Uh, yeah.
What do you think he can do about it?
I think for him, realizing that he's got an opportunity every day to aspire for more, to seek out a new way of being, that it's not easy. And the best thing is to, look for people who are living a life that resonates with him in terms of the character and the relationships that matter most, healthy relationships. And I think that is something worth seeking out. It's hard to see it if you don't know what that looks like, though, and if that hasn't been modeled to you.
Mm.
And so, that is such a difficult proposition. Uh, I feel for any young person and young boy who may find themselves in that scenario.
Would you say anything to parents?
I would just, as I try to say always, like young people are living in a world that they haven't created, but they're having to navigate it, and it's on us to actually help in, to be intentional, to lean in, to make it easier for them to be healthy, to form respectful relationships. And we owe it to them to model that, to
Mm.
give them the tools, the language, and the opportunities to fail, to make mistakes, and continue to choose things that are good for them and good for others. And that parents are so well placed to do this. Parents are so well placed to know their young people and where they're at, and to not only model it but have those teachable moments. No one else can take the role of a parent. Educators like me, have a role to play, but it's nothing compared to the role that parents get to play day in, day out. It's hard. I commend them. I thank them for the ones that are just doing their absolute utmost, and to just know it's worth it.
Mm,
And I see that. I see the benefit, and I see how grounded those kids are who have know that they've got mum, dad, carer, whoever it is in their corner, who've created those spaces for them to, yeah, I guess grow and learn and be safe.
beautiful. And lastly, if you were a young person yourself and you had a guy called Daniel come in and was going to do a talk to you, what would you take away from your own presentation at your own school?
It's a good question. I'm actually speaking at my former high school for the first time in 10 days.
Oh,
So that's an interesting proposition.
it's meant to be.
Uh, yeah, yeah, yeah. I think for me, it would have given me permission to realize I didn't have to be like these other guys. I didn't, and it was actually a good thing that I didn't buckle to some of the peer pressure. I definitely couldn't stand up for myself, but I think it would have assured me and comforted me that I could be a soft, sensitive young man, and that that was a good thing. And it was a good thing if the culture didn't crush that out of me, that that would actually be something commendable if you can get through your adolescent years and still keep your sensitivities and have not, I guess, yeah, become callous towards yourself and towards others.
Yeah, change. It's that one of that big thing. We all just change because we just want to fit in and be accepted and loved. And because,
Mm-hmm.
the opposite to that is not being loved and not being good enough. And we all know we hate those feelings. But thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate your time and all the work that you're doing in this space. And I know so many communities would thank you as well. So just thank you for what you were doing and please continue to do it because I know it's making waves and it's really starting and challenging those stigmas that need to be challenged in this space. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much for having me on The Secret Burden, and thank you for your work and your voice.
No, absolutely. And as well, thank you to everyone else out there for joining us for another Secret Sunday session. Where can people find you, Daniel, if they want to find out more or even have you come along to their school?
Oh, that's so kind. They can just head to my website, danielprincipe.com.au.
Incredible. We'll go check Daniel out there. Otherwise, once again, thank you for joining us for another session, and we'll catch you guys all next time. Kind of done it backwards
Yes.
because you did. You said you won gold the first time that you went to the Olympics.